Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
Today we're going back to the election of 1840. Chris, some people have said that this election, the election of 1840, is the first modern campaign for the U.S. presidency. And if that's saying anything, that this is going to be an interesting election to look at.
Yes, it's the first modern style political showdown between the heavyweights, if you will. But, it's also basically a circus. You've got everything that you could think of under the big top of the election of 1840. And, it really is a fascinating look at how the elections have, changed and how they still remain the same because truly this was a heavyweight showdown that was very similar to some of the most recent political fights or candidate elections that you will see, because you have two candidates who are very well known and either loved or despised, depending on which party you are in. You think about Martin Van Buren, who is the sitting president. Well, many people loved Martin Van Buren so much that they called him Martin Van Ruin, because he had basically resulted in creating an economic depression known as the Panic of 1837. So, when you look at that candidate, everybody's wanting a new person to come along, someone who will challenge old Martin Van Ruin. And so it sets up for a good showdown.
It does. In the Whig Party, Martin Van Buren was Democrat. And just to give our listeners a little background, Van Buren was Andrew Jackson's second vice president. And um, also Andrew Jackson's sort of hand-picked successor. That's something we don't really have today, is it? I mean, we don't have presidents who leave off with sort of their hand-picked successor out there and pushing them.
Right. And this in this situation, and you kind of see that a little bit with Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, kind of the successor. But how did that work out? That worked out so terribly
Yeah.
that Teddy decided he'd go back again and called it the Bull Moose Party. So it's kind of hard to, make those transitions.
Yeah, and it didn't work well for Van Buren, as you just mentioned, with the panic of 37. Um, but here's Martin Van Buren. He's sort of the founder of the Democrat Party, at least at that particular point. And Andrew Jackson was really a big part of that. And after 4 years with Van Buren, people are ready to make a change and get away from Van Buren. And here comes the Whigs with William Henry Harrison. And it wasn't the first time Van Buren had faced Harrison. In 1836, the Whigs had run Harrison with two other candidates. But what ended up happening is they split the vote amongst themselves, allowing Van Buren to win. So didn't make the same mistake in 1836. I mean, excuse me, 1840, excuse me, 1840. Didn't make the same mistake in 1840, but they did run William Henry Harrison, who had a little bit of a history behind him by this point.
Well, in Henry Harrison, when you think about leaders and who you're looking for to be a president, back then they were looking for someone who was rough and ready, using another political phrase going back from Teddy Roosevelt also. But William Henry Harrison was a war hero.
Mhm.
He had successfully helped at the Battle of Tippecanoe, and he was known as a man of the people, the Andrew Jackson philosophy, if you will, hard, rugged, just living off the land. I remember people basically saying that he was humble. This is kind of where your hard cider comes in, and so he's just that everyday person, and uh, being a war hero, I go back to Dwight D. Eisenhower. One of the reasons that I like Ike became such a political advertisement was the role that he had in creating the D-Day plan. And so you look for someone with that military background because if they can lead a military and if they can be successful in battles, then surely they can lead a nation. And a lot of people saw that in the humble, hardworking man known as William Henry Harrison.
Yeah, and you know the reality of Harrison, what the Whigs said about him, old, you know, hard cider and all that kind of stuff, really wasn't who he was. You know, he was born into a very wealthy Virginia family. He had learned and studied the classics. He was a man of wealth and education and all that at the time. But like you said, he had earned also a reputation of being an Indian fighter, of being someone who was, you know, sort of like you talk about Andrew Jackson, that sort of same image that the Whigs and Harrison took from the Democrats and Jackson and sort of stole that type of imagery and really did a great job if you look at it from a campaign standpoint of view, presenting William Henry Harrison as the next Andrew Jackson, you know, and they came up with this whole the campaign. I just think is just absolutely fascinating. I mean, yes, they spend a lot of time attacking each other, attacking the other person's you know, integrity or whatever, but they also come up with some wild little gimmicks. And one of them, which is just my favorite, they would have these little whiskey bottles that were in the shape of log cabins, and they would give out whiskey in these little log cabin shaped whiskey bottles as a campaign promotion for William Henry Harrison, that hard cider thing. And they leaned into that pretty hard.
Well, you lean into giving people whiskey for free and a little souvenir mug or
Hmm.
shot glass. I mean, that's just another form of political advertisement, right? Getting out and winning the vote, especially with the hard cider or with the whiskey, offering someone a drink is kind of like today. If you offer someone a Pepsi or,
Yep.
a pack of nabs, I mean, there's value in that. You're investing in it. So I think there's a lot to be said about how they did that. But we got to go back to Van Ruin also,
Yeah.
because it is a huge difference between Henry Harrison and Van Buren. We've talked about log cabin, man of the people kind of thing, even though he technically wasn't.
Hmm.
Well, they turned it around also with Van Buren because Van Buren was a rich, out of touch aristocrat. He had fancy clothes, lived in a nice house. He instead of sipping wine or instead of sipping whiskey, he sipped wine. And this is all playing out while there is the panic of 1837, the economic crisis. And it kind of goes back even to world affairs when you have King Louis, let them have their cake too and enjoying the grandeur of life while everybody else is suffering around you. It doesn't look good. And with advertisements and newspapers and articles and, just word of mouth, it really is a big difference between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that is why William Henry Harrison is so popular because he does have that Andrew Jackson 2.0 model. Also, that he's running with John Tyler as his vice president, who has military background as well. So there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Van Buren clearly didn't have the modern, you think about modern politics and people running for president, you know, they have a whole team around them. And they have people that, you know, manage their image and all that. And even then, it doesn't really work as you're talking about Martin Van Buren and how he was viewed as maybe being out of touch with the average person. I'm going back in my mind to 2012 with Mitt Romney. You know, that there were a lot of people who, as he was running against Barack Obama, there were a lot of people who pointed out his personal wealth, you know, and they talked about elevators in the home and all this kind of stuff. And it sort of brings about that same image that, you know, here's someone who's not like us. But when you look at William Henry Harrison, at least as far as the public was concerned at the time, here's a guy who's like us. Here's a guy who understands where we're coming from. And you can see that even in 2016 and 2024, I think to some degree with Donald Trump, is that there are a lot of people who look at Donald Trump and say he understands where we're coming from. He understands our pain, as Bill Clinton would say, I feel your pain. He understands the struggles and all this kind of thing. And I think that's what William Henry Harrison was able to, with his modern-esque campaign, he was able to really reach across and get into that, trying to sort of tell people, I know where you are. I'm like you. I understand you. And that was, of course, something big with Andrew Jackson. Remember when Andrew Jackson was first elected? What was it, in 1828, in 1829, when he was sworn in and they went to the White House, that whole mob just mobbed the White House, not out of anger, but it was a party that got way out of control as just common everyday people came into the political process for the first time. Because, of course, as you know, um, um, that wasn't the case, or hadn't been the case for all of American history at that point. Because when you talk about the founders, George Washington, John Adams, these people, in many ways, they were elitists who thought only the elite of society should have a say in how things are going.
And you can say that the whiskey worked.
Hmm.
Political slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too,
Yep.
which, my gosh, anybody who has taken a history class with any remote interest in history understands that and remembers that. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Battle of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, Tyler too, Tyler being the vice president, battle person as well. And using those techniques along with some parades and other things, but then also just capturing the moment of the panic of 1837, of Martin Van Buren, using that terminology, showing him living the high life while everybody is just struggling to get a loaf of bread. Well, it results in 80% of eligible voters showing up to vote. That is, I mean, unheard of. Even today, we talk about voter turnout, and you have one of the highest voter turnouts ever, with 80% of the people showing up. And not only did they show up, but they showed out because, with those 80%, William Henry Harrison becomes the next president by getting 234 electoral votes, whereas Martin Van Buren only gets 60. And I truly believe that William Henry Harrison, I'm not trying to disparage him, but William Henry Harrison doesn't really bring a lot to the table politically to be president of the United States. He does so militarily, he does so with publicity and promotional. But what makes William Henry Harrison so popular is that he wins so big is the political machine that he has that helps elect him as president of the United States. Martin Van Buren thought he had it in the bag. Sitting president, not a problem, should be okay. We had a little hiccup with the panic. We're over that. We're going to be okay. But you see just how important advertising is, telling your story is. It really makes a big difference, as it did with William Henry Harrison and the fact that he won so big.
Yeah, and the fact that he went so big, that brings up something I read about when researching for this episode. In June of 1840, William Henry Harrison had a rally of sorts. And talk about something that's modern. George Washington certainly wasn't going around having rallies. John Adams wasn't going around having rallies. But he has his rally at the site of the Tippecanoe battle, and over 60,000 people show up. I mean, that's a stadium of fans today. That many people are going to show up to a campaign rally in 1840 for this presidential candidate.
That
William,
you can't even hear.
yeah, you
You
can't even hear. Probably
can't hear
can't
what he's
see.
saying. There's
Yeah.
no microphone. There's no, I mean, they're just trying, can you even get a glimpse of him?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, I mean you don't have stands, you don't have any of that. So he's just, maybe he's on an elevated stage of some sort, but no, you're not going to hear him. You're not going to have a good sight of him. So, but it shows, like you were saying earlier, it shows how he, had that advertising, and they did a great job with that and tapped into something that people were unhappy about. Um,
I do a exercise in one of the classes that I teach at college, and we look at voting trends of individuals. And I go back to the election between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. And research specifically states that people voted for John F. Kennedy because of his looks, not his politics. He was young, he was good looking. The first debate that was in color TV, people had the opportunity to really see him. And even today, people will, I hate to say it, judge a book by its cover. And we don't want to be that way, but there is something that is still there. You see it with William Henry Harrison. He was a man of the people. They wanted him. They had the image of Martin Van Buren. It's in their minds. They hear this image, they see this image, and so people flock towards. The Teddy Roosevelts, the Dwight D. Eisenhowers, I like Ike, the Ronald Reagans, the Barack Obamas. They go to those individuals. And now I would even say look at the comparison between Donald Trump and Joseph Biden. That the man of the people and he is detached from the people. That was a huge part of the last political campaign. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about the person's look and the person's just personality and who they are, more so than sometimes than just politics. But anyway, the moral of the story is William Henry Harrison had some good people that ran his campaign. He blew it out big. He won. I'm sure the whiskey really helped also.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier. Give some big people peanuts and Pepsi and they'll vote for you. I'm like, well, our standards have fallen greatly from whiskey in a log cabin bottle to a Pepsi Cola and a little thing of peanuts. Of course, that is very good, though. I'll have to say that. That is very good. Well, I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode on the election of 1840. Please share this podcast with your friends and family. Until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
I'll talk to you later.